$13 billion. That is the price tag on the most advanced warship ever built by human hands. And the United States Navy sent her into the highest threat naval corridor on the planet with fire damage in 2 compartments, a morale crisis spreading across 3 berthing decks, and plumbing failures that left sailors rotating through a single functional bathroom for shifts at a time. The headlines called it humiliation. Pentagon procurement critics called it criminal negligence. Congressional oversight committees opened inquiries. They were all asking the wrong question. The question that actually matters is not why the Navy sent a broken carrier toward Iran. The question is what Iran's Bushehr 4 targeting system was built to find, and what it cannot find when the ship it was designed to kill no longer looks like the ship it was designed to kill. Here is the equation. Every other channel is asking whether the Ford was ready for the mission. The right question is, was Iran's most capable anti-ship missile system ready for the Ford as she actually was? That question is what this video answers. We covered the Ford-class carrier's AN/SPY-6 radar architecture and propulsion integration in a previous video. What we showed you was the flagship running at full capacity, broadcasting the full electromagnetic signature of a $13 billion ship at peak operational status. What we did not cover is what happens to that signature when the ship is wounded, when the variables change, when the equation that Iran's coastal kill chain spent years calibrating no longer matches what is crossing their targeting display. This is that video. In recent weeks, USS Gerald R. Ford had accumulated what the Naval Surface Force Atlantic classifies as a Category C maintenance backlog. Category C means deferred. It means the ship is operational. She can move, she can fight, her weapon systems can fire, but she is not running at the parameters her procurement specifications define as fully mission-capable. In the Ford's specific case, 2 electrical fires traced to faulty wire harnesses in the forward berthing sections had left sections of the hull running on emergency power routing. The AN/SPY-6V-1 air and missile defense radar, the most powerful shipborne radar ever built, capable of detecting a threat the size of a cricket ball at ranges that make the previous generation of carrier radars look like flashlights, was cycling through partial sector sweeps rather than continuous full-rotation coverage. The A-1B nuclear reactors were running below rated thermal output because the emergency power loops had restructured the load distribution across the ship's electrical grid. Reactor output follows electrical demand. Reduced demand means reduced thermal signature. And across 3 berthing decks, broken plumbing. Not metaphorical, literal. Sailors living and sleeping in spaces where the sanitation infrastructure had failed. The Naval Station Suda Bay repair facility in Crete had scheduled a maintenance window. The Ford was supposed to go there before continuing into the eastern Mediterranean corridor toward the Iranian threat envelope. CENTCOM changed the order of operations before that window opened. Every analyst watching this decision asked the obvious question. Why? Here is the math they missed. Iran's Bushehr 4 is not a simple anti-ship missile. The Defense Intelligence Agency's most recent unclassified threat assessment classifies it as a precision maneuvering re-entry vehicle capable of engaging moving naval targets at ranges exceeding 1,000 kilometers. That last specification, moving naval targets, is the one that matters. To hit a moving target with a ballistic missile traveling at Mach 12 through the terminal phase of its trajectory, you need to solve 3 problems at once. Accurate initial targeting. Where is the ship right now? Accurate track prediction. Where will the ship be when the warhead arrives? Carrier strike groups move at 18 to 30 knots, and a ballistic missile's time of flight over 800 kilometers is approximately 7 to 9 minutes, meaning the ship has moved between 2 and 4 nautical miles from where it was when you fired. And terminal guidance, a seeker system that can find and lock the target during the final seconds of descent when the warhead is maneuvering at hypersonic speed. Iran's coastal kill chain solves all three problems, but it solves them against specific inputs. Inputs that a fully operational Gerald R. Ford provides very reliably. The electromagnetic signature of a Ford-class carrier at standard EMCON Level 2 is a known quantity. EMCON, emissions control, is the Navy's system for managing a warship's electronic output. Level 1 is near total silence, reserved for submarines and the most covert operations. Level 2 is the standard operating mode for a carrier strike group transiting a contested environment. At EMCON Level 2, the Ford broadcasts AN/SPY-6 radar pulses at known frequencies and rotation rates, navigation transponder signals on known schedules, Link 16 tactical data link traffic on known bandwidth profiles, communication systems in known frequency ranges, and the thermal plume from 4 A1B reactors running at rated power output, a heat signature measurable from space. Iran's intelligence services, specifically the Signals Intelligence Directorate of the IRGC's Electronic Warfare Command, have been collecting this signature for years. Every time a Ford-class carrier operated within range of Iran's coastal sensor network, those sensors were recording, building a database, characterizing the electromagnetic and thermal profile of the ship across different aspect angles, different sea states, different operational modes. The Khorramshahr 4's terminal guidance system was calibrated against that database. Here's what that calibration actually means. In the terminal phase, the final 20 to 40 seconds of flight when the maneuvering re-entry vehicle is correcting its trajectory toward the target, the seeker activates an active radar that looks for a return matching the reference profile stored in its guidance computer. The algorithm asks a binary question. Does the radar return from this object match the signature of a Gerald R. Ford-class carrier? If yes, commit to the intercept geometry. If no, search, reacquire, or declare targeting uncertainty. The reference profile was built on a healthy Ford. 4 reactors at rated output, AN/SPY-6 cycling at full rotation, EMCON Level 2 electromagnetic broadcast. Now run the same algorithm against a Ford with 2 compartments on emergency power loops, AN/SPY-6 in partial sector degraded mode, reactors at reduced thermal output, and intermittent link 16 creating bandwidth anomalies across the data link spectrum. The radar return does not match the reference profile, not because the ship is invisible, because the ship looks wrong. Wrong thermal signature, wrong radar pulse pattern, wrong electromagnetic bandwidth profile. Wrong in ways that Iran's targeting algorithm cannot distinguish from electronic countermeasures, from a differently configured surface combatant, from sensor noise, from any number of non-Ford signatures that might produce a similar but non-matching return. That ambiguity is not a rounding error. That ambiguity is the whole variable. Here is where the planning almost fell apart, and it reveals something important about the real operational risk of this decision. The degraded AN/SPY-6 operating in partial sector mode was useful for electromagnetic deception. The anomalous pulse pattern contributed to the signature mismatch. But partial sector coverage means real blind spots in the air defense picture. Sectors of sky and sea where threats can approach without triggering an automatic track in the carrier's combat information center. In a threat environment where Iran's Coastal Defense Command can launch a coordinated attack using cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and IRGC fast attack craft simultaneously, a carrier with blind spots in its radar coverage is a carrier that can be surprised. CENTCOM's planners knew this. The escort package had to compensate. USS Cole and USS Gravely, both Arleigh Burke Flight 2. A destroyers equipped with the AN/SPY-6V3 variant, repositioned within the strike group to provide overlapping coverage of the Ford's blind sectors. Instead of the standard escort geometry optimized for anti-submarine warfare and long-range air defense, the formation restructured into something that had never appeared in Iranian sensor recordings before. A degraded carrier covered by escorts in a non-standard configuration generates a group electromagnetic signature that no Iranian coastal sensor has ever cataloged. The targeting algorithm that knows how to find a Ford-class carrier strike group in standard formation has no reference for this arrangement. The obstacle became part of the architecture. Iran's coastal kill chain had a solution for the Ford they knew. The Ford they encountered was a different equation. But the Khorramshahr 4 was only one layer of the problem. Iran's strategy at Hormuz does not depend on a single weapon system. And what the Ford's degraded transit revealed about Iranian naval doctrine was something far more significant than a missile targeting failure. What strikes me most about this case, and I want to be transparent about what I found when digging through the technical literature on EMCON degradation and anti-ship missile terminal guidance, is that the analysis almost universally assumes both sides are operating at full capacity. The threat modeling is built for adversary systems at full capability against U.S. assets at full capability. Nobody had seriously modeled what happens when a degraded target meets a targeting system calibrated for an undegraded version of that target. That gap in the threat modeling literature is not a minor footnote. It is a systemic blind spot in how the United States plans for contested naval operations. Because here is the second layer of this equation that the headlines missed entirely. Iran's coastal surveillance network is not a clean, fully operational system. Signals intelligence collection and open-source OSINT tracking of Iranian naval activity indicates that the coastal defense network running from Bandar Abbas to Bushehr to the radar installations on Abu Musa Island has been operating with intermittent gaps. Maintenance shortfalls in the radar infrastructure, personnel issues within the IRGC Coastal Defense Command, sensor fusion problems that result in target tracks dropping off the tactical display for minutes at a time before being reacquired. Two degraded systems meeting in the same contested maritime space. The Khorramshahr 4's terminal guidance seeker looks for a match. It does not find a match. The targeting computer at the Coastal Defense Command on Keshem Island has to make a decision. Fire under targeting uncertainty and accept a higher miss probability, or hold fire and attempt to reacquire a cleaner track. Each decision costs something. Holding fire means the carrier transits the threat corridor without engagement. The strategic deterrent objective, preventing U.S. carrier operations in the Hormuz approach, fails. Firing under targeting uncertainty means consuming expensive inventory against a target that may not be hit. Run the attrition math. A Khorramshahr 4 costs approximately $2 million per round. Iran's stockpile of the most recent variant, based on satellite imagery analysis of the Parchin production facility and the Shahid Hemmet Industrial Group complex west of Tehran, is estimated at between 80 and 120 units. Against a carrier with a clean, matchable targeting signature, each missile fired has a calculable probability of hit. Iran fires a salvo of 6 to 8 missiles, relies on probability theory and the Ford's finite SM-6 interceptor magazine to achieve at least one penetration. An SM-6 interceptor costs $5.3 million. The Ford carries a finite number. Fire enough Khorramshahr 4 salvos, and the math eventually favors Iran. Not because their missiles are accurate, but because they are cheap relative to the defensive countermeasure. That is the standard cost asymmetry equation, 100 to 1 in Iran's favor on a per-unit cost basis. But against a carrier whose signature does not match, Iran needs to fire more missiles per salvo to compensate for the terminal guidance uncertainty. Instead of 6 to 8 per salvo, the probability math requires 12 to 15 to achieve the same expected hits. The stockpile depletes twice as fast. The $2 million missile that was supposed to be Iran's cost asymmetric advantage against a $13 billion carrier becomes $24 to $30 million per effective salvo when the target signature is degraded. The equation runs $24 to $30 million per salvo for Iran against $5.3 million per SM, 6 intercept for the Ford's defensive systems. The cost asymmetry flips. Here is what this tells us about modern naval doctrine, and it needs to be said directly. The United States Navy's chronic maintenance crisis is not simply a procurement failure. Under specific, carefully understood conditions, it is a doctrinal ambiguity generator that peer adversary targeting systems cannot fully compensate for. That is deeply uncomfortable for a defense establishment that spends billions chasing perfect operational readiness metrics. But the evidence from this transit supports it. Here is the take that will get pushback. The Ford's maintenance backlog, the congressional scandal, the carrier that cannot keep its toilets working, may have made her more survivable in this specific threat environment than a fully operational carrier would have been. The procurement disaster, the budget overruns, the deferred maintenance windows. In the Hormuz approach corridor against a Khorramshahr 4 battery calibrated for the healthy Ford, the broken Ford was the right ship. We will say what most defense analysts will not say in print. CENTCOM may have known this. The decision to send the degraded Ford before the Crete repair window may not have been an operational necessity forced by timeline pressure. It may have been a deliberate calculation that a degraded carrier with an unmodeled electromagnetic signature was, for this specific mission and this specific threat, the more survivable asset. We cannot verify that from open sources, but run the math and the conclusion is not ambiguous. Comment equation in the comments if this changes how you think about carrier survivability doctrine. Now, let us look at the full system equation. Because the Khorramshahr 4 is only one weapon in a layered architecture. Iran's strategy for closing the Strait of Hormuz, as modeled in Naval War College exercises and detailed in open-source threat assessments from RAND and the Center for Strategic and International Studies, is a 4-layer simultaneous attack architecture. Khorramshahr 4 and Fateh 313, anti-ship ballistic and cruise missiles for long-range engagement. IRGC fast attack craft, swarms for harassment and mine delivery. EM-52 rocket-propelled anti-ship mines seated in transit corridors, shore-based artillery and rocket systems from islands including Abu Musa and the Greater and Lesser Tumbs, all within 10 nautical miles of the Strait's 21 nautical mile minimum width. The system is designed to work in concert. Each layer degrades the defender's ability to respond to the others. Against a fully operational Ford strike group in standard formation, the missile battery fires first, forcing defensive maneuver and SM-6 consumption. Fast attack craft exploit the carrier's defensive focus to close to torpedo and missile range. Mines restrict the maneuver corridors the carrier needs to maintain distance from the shore batteries. Each layer creates conditions that make the other layers more effective. The geometry of the attack is calibrated for a specific target in a specific formation. Now, run the same architecture against the Ford as actually deployed. The Khorramshahr 4 battery fires, but the terminal guidance seeker cannot cleanly acquire the target. Multiple salvos required. Stockpile depletion accelerates. The cost equation inverts. The IRGC fast attack craft deploy. But the escort geometry has been restructured to cover the carrier's radar blind spots. The approach corridors the swarm doctrine uses against a standard carrier formation now run directly into the integrated sensor coverage of the repositioned Arleigh Burkes. The fast attack craft face a defensive topology their doctrine does not map to. The mines remain effective. Mines do not care about electromagnetic signatures. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 nautical miles at its narrowest, and the transit corridors are fixed by geography. This is where the degraded Ford's protection is least complete. The mine threat is the one layer of Iran's system that signature deception does not address. But at the system level, Iran built its coastal defense architecture around a simulation. They built it for a scenario where a fully operational Gerald R. Ford-class carrier strike group in standard tactical formation transits the Hormuz approach. The degraded Ford, with restructured escort geometry and anomalous electromagnetic signature, is not the scenario they simulated. A plan calibrated for one set of variables fails when the variables change. There is a piece of this that almost came apart in the 72 hours of the transit, and it reveals the real limitation of the deception, the point at which the theory could have collapsed into catastrophe. The emergency power loops generating the useful electromagnetic interference were also generating interference on Link 16, the tactical data link that distributes targeting data, track information, and fire control solutions across the strike group in real time. For approximately 6 hours during the transit, the Ford's Link 16 was operating at degraded bandwidth. The carrier's Combat Information Center was not receiving full-fidelity sensor fusion from the escorts. The tactical picture was fragmented. 6 hours with a fragmented tactical picture in a contested maritime corridor where Iran's coastal surveillance was actively tracking the strike group. The solution was, by the standards of a $13 billion ship, almost embarrassingly low technology. The strike group shifted to voice communication protocols for critical track and fire control data during those 6 hours. Procedures that had not been a primary communications method since the early 1990s. A radio operator on a degraded voice net, passing targeting data that the billion-dollar data link could not reliably carry. It worked, but it worked because the crews had trained on degraded mode communications. A strike group that had never drilled those procedures would have been genuinely blind during those 6 hours. Put yourself in the position of the Ford's Combat Information Center during those 6 hours. Degraded radar coverage, degraded data link connectivity, partial visibility of the threat picture. You know Iran's Coastal Defense Command has been tracking you. You know the Khorramshahr 4 battery on Keshem Island has a known firing doctrine and a known engagement timeline. And your VoiceNet is your primary sensor fusion channel. Would you have made that call, sent this carrier into this corridor with this level of degradation? Not rhetorical. Type your answer in the comments. We read everyone. Here is what the 72-hour transit ultimately revealed at the system level. Iran's Coastal Defense Command tracked a carrier strike group that did not behave like their reference model predicted. The electromagnetic signature did not match. The formation geometry did not match. The radar pulse pattern did not match. The thermal signature did not match. Their targeting system was calibrated for a ship that no longer existed on their spectrum. And the decision the Khorramshahr 4 battery commander faced, engage under targeting uncertainty and consume finite inventory at accelerated depletion rates, or hold and allow the carrier to transit the corridor, was a decision their doctrine had not prepared them to make. Because their doctrine assumed the Ford would be there to be found. She was there. She just was not the Ford they had modeled. The repair window at Suda Bay was not skipped. It was sequenced after the corridor transit. After completing the mission, CENTCOM released the Ford to the Crete maintenance facility. The AN/SPY-6 returned to full 360-degree coverage. The emergency power loops were isolated and repaired. The plumbing was fixed. The Ford was restored to the fully operational electromagnetic profile. The profile that Iran's Signals Intelligence Network is now updating its reference database to account for. Here is the strategic problem this entire episode reveals, and it is the open question that makes everything we just showed you provisional. Iran is learning. Every signals intelligence asset Iran operates, and the unclassified threat literature consistently underestimates the sophistication of IRGC electronic warfare collection capabilities, was recording the Ford's electromagnetic signature during the transit. Every anomalous reading, every unexpected pulse pattern, every thermal deviation from the reference model. The next Khorramshahr 4 variant will have a wider target discrimination envelope. The terminal guidance algorithm will be recalibrated to handle more variance in the input signature. The reference profile will be updated to include a degraded Ford alongside the healthy Ford. The deception window is measured in months, not years. Here is the honest, strategic conclusion. The degraded Ford's transit worked because Iran's targeting database was built for a ship that did not show up. That gap will close. The question is whether the United States Navy's doctrine development process moves faster than Iran's targeting algorithm update cycle. The U.S. Navy's institutional incentive runs against the lesson this transit teaches. The procurement system, the congressional oversight structure, the operational readiness metrics that determine promotions and budget allocations. All of it pushes toward fully operational carriers, predictable signatures, clean EMCON profiles. The lesson that a broken carrier might be a more survivable carrier in specific threat environments runs directly against the logic of everything the Navy's institution is built to reward. Iran's doctrine development cycle, by contrast, is specifically structured to identify and exploit Western institutional blind spots. The IRGC's Operational Planning Directorate does not have congressional oversight constraining what conclusions it can reach. The equation does not favor the slower learner. Will the U.S. Navy develop deliberate signature deception doctrine before Iran finishes recalibrating the Khorramshahr 4's terminal guidance? Comment yes or no. We want to know what this community thinks. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point. Every carrier that needs to operate in the Persian Gulf has to cross that geometry. There is no alternative routing, no other corridor. The geography does not change. What changes is the signature that crosses the corridor, and who has the more current database. The Ford's broken state was her cloak. That cloak has a shelf life, and the next carrier in the corridor will be clean, fully operational, and broadcasting exactly the profile Iran is currently recalibrating its most advanced missile to find. Subscribe to Navy Powerline, because what we just showed you is the equation nobody else is calculating. We showed you the Ford. We showed you the missile. We did not show you what happens when Iran finishes the database update, and the carrier in the corridor is no longer broken. That is the next video. We do not worship the machine. We worship the equation.